Hey, what's up everybody? Michael DiTullo here. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be talking about drawing a shoe in proportion. So I wanted to do this video because I've noticed out there on the internets, on Instagram and elsewhere, I've seen a lot of really cool footwear concepts that don't seem to take into account the shape of the foot. At the end of the day, a shoe has to fit a foot. You have to be able to walk in it. It has to be biometrically correct, at least to a certain degree, so that it's functional. And if it's a piece of performance footwear, even more so. So I wanted to do a basic 3/4 sketch of a shoe and show you how I build that around first a foot form and then giving an allowance for a midsole. Before we jump into the time lapse, let's talk a little bit about some of those terms. So this is a Jordan I worked on, an LX3 prototype from way back in the day. And you can see it's got a pretty healthy allowance here for the actual toe box. This is based off of a running shoe last, which is, if you're using a running shoe last, it's one of the sleeker lasts you can use, but you can still see there's quite a bit of height here, right? So any accurate concept sketch for a shoe is going to take that into account. Otherwise, what you're drawing is not going to represent what's going to come back in reality. The other thing when you look at this prototype is you'll see, again, a healthy amount of kind of midsole here, right? There's a good amount of thickness under the actual balls of the feet for cushioning, even more thickness in the heel for coming down on the heel. And this is, again, based on a running shoe last. If we're looking on something based on a basketball shoe last, this is the Jordan 22 low, which I worked on the low version of this shoe, the 22 itself being designed by Dwayne Edwards, of course. You'll notice even more thickness, right? Depending on the shoe type, what it's used for. So I think it's important to accurately depict those. When you're doing kind of ideation sketches for yourself, that's one thing. You're exploring, you're reaching out into different territory. But once you're getting to the point where you're having to show your concepts to other people, especially developers and even marketing people who might not be able to take those abstract lines and envision how it's going to look for real, I feel like I want to show things in a little bit more of an accurate way. When I'm doing a sketch like this, one of the first things I'll sketch out is actually the foot form. When I started as a footwear designer, one of the things I did was to study a lot of foot anatomy and try to understand not only the basic geometry of the foot, but what was going on inside of the foot, the skeletal elements, the musculature, how it all worked, so that when I drew the foot, I could understand what was going on. And when I drew the shoe around that, I could understand what needed to flex, what needed to stay stable. Once I have that basic kind of foot form in there, the next thing I'll draw is what I think the offsets will be for that shoe in terms of the cushioning, right? Is this going to have a lot of cushioning? Is it going to be more of a natural feel kind of a shoe that's much lower to the ground, or what's called a zero drop shoe, where there's no offset between the heel and the toe? In this case, let's just put in kind of a pretty standard kind of running shoe offset for cushioning for this concept. Once I have those set, now I can start exploring the design. And you'll see as I progress through the sketch, like I'm trying to figure this sketch out. I'm sketching up multiple different designs, multiple different overlays as I go along. Once I have a basic understanding of what I think the design is going to be, now I'll put a new layer on top and start cleaning that up with some nice, clean line work. It's a sketch. I'm being loose, but I'm trying to be intentional about it, trying to get things in the right proportion. And I'm also trying to have that line work feel really nice. Once the line work is feeling good, I'm going to put a new layer below the line work layer and start shading. So I'm just starting with black airbrush here, starting to give shade to some of these different dimensions in the upper, in the midsole, and getting that all set. I'm also going to add some textures, and textures really help give the sketch a little bit of life, a little bit more realism. Now I'm going to start getting some color blocking in. You can see just how adding this color blocking brings the shading up a level. Now that I have the color blocking in, I'm going to go back in with another layer and add some white highlights, just some white airbrush here. The shading kind of takes everything around, but I want to pull those forward surfaces towards me a little bit with some white airbrush. And I'm always exploring, I'm always playing with details. Maybe we need to add a heel tab here. I also want to take a look at what this looks like in a different colorway. So I'm going to swap out this orange for blue. Let me break down those layers for you one more time. I started with the realistic foot form and then the realistic cushioning offset. After that, I did a bunch of explorations and then cleaned those up into some nicer line work that I could take into a rendering. Added some shading to that and then some color blocking behind that. And those are my final layers for the final sketch. It's okay to exaggerate it a little bit. You know, it doesn't have to be totally conforming to the exact proportions of reality. I want to make it exciting, I want to make it fun, but I also want to make it believable. And to me, that's that balance. You know, this sketch, slightly exaggerated, but also I think believable. And I think when you explore your concepts, you want to be thinking about it that way. You want to excite, you want to influence, you want to persuade, but you don't want to essentially sell something through a compelling sketch that could be never made a reality. Because then you get into the situation, and I've been in this situation where I do a really exciting initial sketch and then we start putting it into the tech pack form to the last, and the client's like, well, it doesn't look the same. It's like, well, yeah, it's just not the super sleek supercar we drew in the initial ideation. Now it's reality. Or even worse, you don't even get to that point and correct what you presented, and then the first sample comes back and it's like, wow, it looks real chunky compared to what you presented. So for me, I want to design for the last that we're going to use, for the offsets we're going to use, and that way I can really kind of control my design to play with that intentionally, instead of having it come back and accidentally being like, oh, I guess this is what it's like. So something for you to think about next time you start working on some footwear concepts. Play with this idea. Try to work on some underlays where you have the actual foot form in there. As always, if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, hit like, hit subscribe. If you tried this technique out, let me know in the comments. I would love to know if it worked for you, and if you have any other things that you like to do to get your shoes in the right proportions in your sketches, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what you do. All right, everybody, till next time.